أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. The Honorable Associate Professor Dr. Zawawi Ismail. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب Sorry. The Honorable Associate Professor Dr. Zawawi Ismail, Dean Faculty of Education, Universiti Malaya. Our respected guest speaker, Dr. Harith Ramli, colleges, lecturers, viewers, our Education YouTube channel subscribers, students, and to all distinguished participants today. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and very good afternoon for Malaysian participants. Good morning for those who are in UK, and very good day to all of you wherever you are. My name is Mohamed Faisal as moderator for webinar today. On behalf of Faculty of Education Universiti Malaya, my great pleasure to welcome all of you in our webinar session under the title Religious Education for Human Well-Being will be given by our guest speaker, Dr. Harith Ramli from Edge Hill University in the Kingdom. Before we start, just a little housekeeping. Right now, I have everyone on mute on Google Meet to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar. Yeah. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your YouTube channel, YouTube live channel. And for those who are in Google Meet, you can also put message in the chat box for any question, as well as you can unmute your microphone to raise your question during Q&A session right after the presentation by our guest speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, to continue our webinar session today, I would like to invite our Associate Professor Dr. Zawawi Ismail, Dean Faculty of Education, Universiti Malaya, to give his welcoming speech. Prof, the floor is yours. We can't listen you, Prof. You can please unmute your mic.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good day for everyone. The honorable guest speaker, Dr. Harith Ramli, my faculty members, lecturers, viewers, and our Education YouTube channel subscribers, students, and all dear distinguished participants today. First of all, may I take this opportunity to welcome all of you in the webinar today, Religious Education for Human Well-Being, which is organized by the Faculty of Education, Universiti Malaya. I am also will be appreciate from the bottom of my heart to our honorable guest speaker today, Dr. Harith Ramli from Edge Hill University, United Kingdom, for accepting our invitation as a speaker in this webinar, although the different time between UK and time now is about 7 hours. Is it correct, Dr. Harith? Okay. I know in UK right now it's about 8 o'clock early in the morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Harith, for your valuable time and as well the sharing of ideas and knowledge on this topic, religious education for human well-being. For me, as a personal point of view, this topic is very important to be discussed together, regardless whoever you are, whether you are a Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhism, Hinduism, or other religions you are believe in this world. No religion teach us to hate human beings and nature. No religion teach us disrespect other religions. The role of religions in society remains essential. Religion must remain a very precocious heritage. Preserving this legacy carefully through religious education will help to develop a renewed respect of religion freedom and democratic principles that support it. This respect will come with religious education, and people will stand and recognize vital place of religion in the have responsibility and kind. In the growth or increasing diversity among communities, especially in the context of Malaysia or any part of communities in the world. Religious education will play a vital part of establishing social bonding and building a true understanding among different societies, reducing social unrest and intolerance and friction between communities. Ladies and gentlemen, religious education is very important because it equips students and people with cultural, social, moral, and spiritual knowledge that aids in mental and physical development within the societies. The lesson learned in the religious education prepares students and people for be responsible and have opportunity later in their life. Religious education assists students in forming values and beliefs that are reflected in behaviors and communication. For example, when approached with an ethical or moral dilemma, people will, with religious education can reflect on the teaching of the faith to make a decision that is aligned with their value and belief. We can see what happened in over the world right now. Every single country was affected with the pandemic COVID-19. People got jobless, no more holidays, no shopping complex, even no window shopping as well. Physically and social distancing, suicide, and many other issues in the society. The virus is going to be spreading rapidly and causing enormous crisis in all the society. In light of pandemic COVID-19, most people are much more open to faith as well as prayer. In the current pandemic, engagement with religious practices give us the control over the situation, helps to make it understandable, and what is more important, give us the hope. Therefore, I like to stress out that when being exposed to a threat, we use to various strategy of survival. Faith being one of them, which allow us to keep hope as well as feel sense of security towards human well-being. Last but not least, my conclusion, religious education in the classroom or any institution enable young people to become religiously literate and engage with the demand of the religious commitment in their everyday life. It provides the skills and attitude which are then fostered the classroom and present through many approaches. The ability to reflect spiritually and then think ethically and theologically is present, and the knowledge, understanding, and skill are effectively interwoven through the curriculum and everyday life. I also believe that post-COVID-19 world is in which religious religious education can provide learners with skill and perspective necessarily to make such challenge into the future. Finally, I appreciate for your attention and being participating in our webinar today. Thank you very much for all, and have maybe you can ask Dr. Harith as our speakers today. Any question he will answer to you soon, inshallah. So that's all for now. Assalamu alaikum and thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Thank you very much, Prof. Zawawi, for amazing welcoming speech for our webinar today. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before I'm going to invite our guest speaker today, please allow me to introduce his background briefly. Actually, Dr. Harith Ramli currently as lecturers in Theology and World Religion at the Faculty of Education at Hill University since 2018, United Kingdom. For those who are not familiar, where it's located at Hill Universities, it is located in northwest of England. Yeah, it takes about 35 minutes from Liverpool and about 35 minutes from Manchester. So if you are a fan of Liverpool and Manchester, you will know this place. And then actually Dr. Harith grew up in Malaysia. Then he is one of alumni of the Sultan Alam Shah Islamic College, Kisas, Selangor Darul Ihsan. His primary research is in the history of Sufism, but then he is also published in the field of Islamic theology and law. He received his doctorate PhD in 2012 from University of Oxford, from what his dissertation on the formation of Sufi thought in the writing of the 4th, 10th century scholars Abu Talib al-Makki. Dr. Harith also obtained MPhil from the same university, Oxford University, and bachelor degree from University of Durham, United Kingdom. Prior to this, he has teaching posts at the Muslim College London, so as University of Nottingham, and also University of Cambridge. He was also as a research fellow at the Cambridge Muslim College, where he then continues to teach and affiliate teaching fellows. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our guest speaker, Dr. Harith Ramli, from Faculty of Education at Hill University, United Kingdom, to give his speech titled Religious Education for Human Well-Being. Dr. Harith, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening even, to all who are here. Thank you very much for inviting me to this session. I'm incredibly honored to be invited by Dr. Zawawi, who I consider by this point, I guess, an old friend, and also, a fellow colleague back from the days when he was based here at Cambridge. No need to apologize for inviting me at 8 a.m. I have very small children, so we tend to wake up around 6 a.m. anyway. And Fajr here is about 2:30, around 2:30 these days. So I'm usually well awake by this time, so no worries at all. It's a real honor to be here, to be invited by University Malaya. And I guess this is an interesting situation where I am representing a much younger university from the UK. Of course, Oxford, Cambridge are much older, but in this case, University Malaya has at least about, I would say, 80, 90 years ahead of Edge Hill University. And as Dr. Faisal rightly pointed out, we are very close to Liverpool and Manchester. So if any of you are interested in coming to see a few football matches and giving us a visit, you're all most welcome. It is a pleasure as well to hear my name because I normally refer to as Dr. Ramli here. So when somebody said Dr. Harith, I was like, who is this person? I've been representing my father. My father has been carrying my doctorate for the last 10 years. So it's a rare moment that I actually hear my name attached to that doctorate. Well, without further ado, I'm going to just start the PowerPoint, if that's okay. While I'm doing that, just a second. Is there a way to do this? I see. Okay, I see. Meanwhile, I'd like to apologize for not being able to deliver this speech in Bahasa Melayu. I speak Malay at home with my children, alhamdulillah, but it's not at a level where I think I can probably effectively communicate all of this in Malay. So my apologies, maafkan saya ya, tidak boleh berbicara dalam bahasa Melayu. But hopefully we can do a bit of practice during the Q&A session. So I'm more than happy to take questions in Malay and respond likewise. So when I was asked to do this talk, it's a very big topic, and I'm honored to be able to talk about this. And I think Dr. Zawawi has already given us a lot of food for thought, really, on the general nature of religious education and its continuing usefulness and relevance for humanity, even as we go into a very uncertain age with, the pandemic, with technological advances moving at a pace faster than we can even imagine. What I'm going to do here is although I am based in the Faculty of Education, I'm not an education studies specialist by any means. I lecture mainly on different religions, and my area of research, of course, is history. So what I'm going to do today is talk a bit about this topic from the long history point of view, borrowing a term from the well-known French analyst school, looking at history rather than sort of focusing on centuries or decades or particular dynastic periods, but trying to look at history from the very large, wide lens of millennia, if possible. So trying to understand what's happening as we go into the future in our present state of religious education. It's important to go back and take a step further back and look at what religious education effectively has meant for humanity for the past few millennia. And then I'm going to do a little bit of comparison between the UK and Malaysia. Now, of course, I'm much more familiar with the UK context at this stage. So what I'm bringing in from observations about Malaysia might be a bit dated. It's based mainly on my own familiarity with the curriculum back when I was a student. So if there's anything wrong there, my apologies, and we can hopefully go into that a lot more in the discussion. So I mainly want to bring about a discussion where we compare how religious education is understood in both these contexts, because there are a lot of similarities, but also significant differences as well. And then actually, when I was first asked to do this, the title Dr. Zawawi first proposed was Religious Education for Human Wellbeing in Society 5.0. And I have to confess my shameful ignorance of not realizing the discussion around Society 5.0 in Malaysia. So I had to do a little bit of looking up on the topic. So Dr. Zawawi kindly allowed me to remove that from the topic, but I think I will reintroduce that towards the end, because actually this provides a good focus for our discussion to go beyond simply just historical speculation or historical reflection, but actually, think about how this long history can be used as an effective way to understand very significant changes that are going to be coming about within our generation and definitely in the generation of our children. So I think it's actually, I'll reintroduce that into the discussion towards the end, because I think it actually is an effective way to reflect. So firstly, it's important to recognize the importance. It's important to recognize that these terms, such as religion, such as well-being, have very long histories of their own. And if we think about religion, religion is a term that obviously has roots in Latin, going back to ancient Rome, when it was used to identify a person's deep devotional relationship with their God. all the way to Christianity, medieval Christianity, when it would use to distinguish between people who were initiated into the church as priests and people who weren't. But within all these contexts, until about the modern age, you know, the term religion was used for very strong, what we would say, spiritual attachment, because the nature of society as a whole, from our perspective, would be religious. So there was no way of saying this person is religious, this person isn't, this is religion and this isn't, because everything was religious. So when we talk about religion, it's important to recognize that it's a modern term, and this has largely to do with the Reformation and the modern state. I'll go into it in a little bit. The second term, the second problem with the term religion, of course, is it's a term that arises within the context of Western culture, i.e., Christianity mainly, right? If you think about, maybe we can include Judaism and Islam as well. So within an Abrahamic religious context, and therefore, when we think about Hinduism, or when we think about Chinese religions, or anywhere religions in North America, you know, peoples there, it might not necessarily mean the same thing. So that's the second difficulty of the term itself. The other difficulty is that the reality of religion is different when we talk about religion at the social level, at the political level, and at the level of the individual. So if we think about a term like being Muslim, from the legal perspective, being Muslim, of course, is defined according to anybody who says the Shahada, right? On the other hand, the reality of being Muslim, right, or we can say a mu'min, the reality of Islam is something in the heart. So when we're talking about religion, there are these two dimensions which you can sort of generalize. At the individual level, where religion becomes something very personal, and religion on this kind of socio-political level, when it becomes a matter of official definition. So when we're talking officially about religion on the scholarly level, we can rarely touch on the individual level, because we cannot really know the contents within someone's heart. Even in the study of something like Sufism, which does try to delve into the characteristics of the states of the heart, there's only so far you can go, right? You can talk about it in a general sense, but I cannot say, when I'm talking academically about Sufism, that this person is a mu'min and this person isn't. The other term that we might want to unpack is the term. One reference here I have that might be of interest to you is Guy Strums's book, New Science: The Discovery of Religion in the Age of Reason, which is an interesting book to look at, because he starts off looking at this development of the concept of religion itself as the Spanish are discovering America, right? As they're arriving and colonizing America, they encounter these new people they never heard about, and they're trying to make sense of their religious practices and rituals. And interestingly, the very first thing that they turned to were concepts that were familiar to them from their encounter with the other religion in Spain, which was Islam. So when they saw a large building in the Caribbean that looked like people were worshiping in it, they would refer to them as mezquita, which, you know, is a Spanish term for masjid. The other term we want to look at is well-being. Now, well-being, of course, has a long history too, and you can read about it in Klaus Bergholz's book, Well-Being: A Cultural History of Healthy Living. And what's interesting about this book is it's written from someone who's also had medical practice. He's a practicing doctor, and it shows that, you know, if you go back to the, you know, ancient history, if you go back to ancient Rome, China, India, the idea of medicine has never been disentangled from the idea of general well-being, so general spiritual well-being. So it's rare to find any culture that simply talks about the body, well-being of the body, or the material body, in the way we talk about it today. Most traditions going into the past would always talk about it as a combination. If you think about Ibn Sina, for example, in his Qanun fi Tibb, you don't see this disentanglement, right? The soul of the spirit and the body and the emotional states are all interconnected. So love sickness, for example, is defined as a sickness alongside other illnesses which we might think today in a physical sense. So it's important to understand that shift as well taking place in the modern age in the concept of medical well-being. Today, when we talk about well-being in our context, we start to think of mental well-being. So we're still disconnecting what's going on here from perhaps what's going on here, and what's going on at a more social level, and without connection to nature and so on. So there's a difficulty here. We need to unpack these terms before we are able to use them in a sense that that can be properly applied. And to do this, we'll start by looking at what I call the long history perspective, which is, again, how religious traditions evolved systems of learning and attitudes to well-being from ancient times. And we have to start somewhere, of course, because we can go further back into history, but then we enter the realm of speculation, where we are then starting to debate about the meaning of different archaeological findings and so on. So I'll start in this age known as the actual age. The term was coined by the existential philosopher Karl Jaspers, who, if I'm not mistaken, also made contributions in the field of philosophy of education. And what's interesting is he coined the term to refer to a phenomenon of different changes, radical changes that were happening in societies across the known world at the time. So all the way from China to India to the Middle East to the Mediterranean. He noticed that there was a kind of common occurrence happening, and in a way that didn't necessarily mean that they were influencing each other, that they were sort of happening spontaneously. So the reasons behind this are unclear, but of course from Karl Jaspers' existentialist philosophy perspective, and to some extent we can say he was a Hegelian, he believed that history is a series of spiritual developments in the evolution of man. So if you're interested in reading a Western philosopher who's interested in spirituality, and you find Hegel or Heidegger too difficult, I would definitely recommend reading Karl Jasper, because he was also very good at writing things in a very clear and comprehensible way that was accessible to the average reader. So the common point here being that there was a shift from religions being kind of closed systems, in the sense that often in many places like Egypt, the religious elites, the temple priests, would know everything about the religion. They would understand the deepest mysteries of the religion, and they would not share it. They would close, if they performed the most important religious rituals would happen inside temples, and the people would be on the outside. They would have no knowledge of what was going on. This also had partly to do with the fact that the writing systems that were used in the pre-actual age were often very complex. So you had to be somebody who had the time and luxury to be educated for many years to be able to understand how to read Egyptian hieroglyphs, or in the context of Mesopotamia or ancient Iraq, the cuneiform system. You had to learn thousands and thousands of different pictures or characters, in the same way that the Chinese language is studied today. So China is an interesting exception, because it never underwent that kind of revolution of moving to the alphabetic system as the other regions, although this happened more recently in the Great Transformation led by Chairman Mao. So what happened was the result of the introduction of new writing systems contributed to the accessibility of religious education, or education as a whole, of course, which meant that for the average person in the Mediterranean or the Middle East or India too, which adopted the alphabet not too long after, if any knowledge that needed to be accessible through reading or recorded writing was accessible to anyone, to much more people. And somehow this also brought about a revolution in the attitude of these religions to the role of the individual. So the importance of the individual became more emphasized, and alongside that, a more egalitarian attitude to society. So we see that this emerges particularly clearly in the case of Judaism, which emphasizes the importance of loving one's neighbor, sharing of wealth. We think about, of course, the liberation story of Moses bringing the people out of Egypt. So this revolution took place on a grand scale and led to the formation, very quickly, of the formation of, foundations of these key empires that then spread this new learning across different regions. So of course we can think about the Greek developments in Greece, such as the pre-Socratics and then Socratic philosophers, were then spread through by the empire of Alexander the Great. And then later on, ancient Rome continues this legacy, building on the foundations of Greek thought and knowledge. If we think about India, once Hinduism and Buddhism had become consolidated in the form that we know today, then the Maurya Empire formulates. And what's interesting about the Maurya Empire is that it was officially a Buddhist empire, and the Emperor Ashoka really tried his best to spread the teachings of Buddhism. But at the same time, India being India, this attitude to religion emphasized the importance of maintaining the freedom at the individual level. So at no point really has there ever been kind of wars of religion or attempts to convert people to one system, even though there have been active attempts to try to spread religions. Even at an official level, no religion ever had the kind of predominating status it would have had in, say, for example, China or ancient Rome. So in Rome, for example, going back to Rome, what happened was that there was still a kind of religion was still characterized by a certain degree of openness, as you would find within India. But at the same time, the Roman Empire increasingly felt the need to define itself as a kind of religious cult, right? And this is where we get the term religion to begin with. So as the emperor started to become identified as the focus of worship, and people were expected, whenever attending a state function, to actually show respect by offering a sacrifice to the emperor or to the Roman state gods, this became a problem. If you were somebody who did not want to participate, it basically meant that you were breaking the law. And this is exactly why the early Christians and the Jews in this period encountered difficulties, because of course their strong belief to the concept of monotheism came into conflict with this. So we find this problem of then the relationship between state and religion between politics and religion at the state level emerging in the context of Rome. Even though on a kind of everyday sense, the culture was more open, as you would find in India, the state increasingly felt the need to start to micromanage, to kind of influence the definitions of religion at a lower level. And we turn to China. This is happening this has from pretty early on been happening from a very early stage, because of the nature of the Chinese states being much more centralized. So China, of course, developed things that we're only started to appreciate in the world maybe 500 years ago, such as paper money and bureaucracy, kind of state-level bureaucracy. So in the Chinese context, from very early on, going back to the introduction of Buddhism or the emergence of Taoism, the state always needed to categorize and label the religion. So if you take what's happening in Rome, it's happening on a more grander scale in China. So we can have two contrasts, really. You have India, on the one hand, India, which is kind of open and has always been open, and maybe only today we're starting to see a situation where, with the rise of Hindu nationalism, India is starting to define, to close the definition of religion. In China, if you wanted to exist as a different religion, you had to be given some kind of state sanction, which means that the state had quite a heavy hand in defining those religions, which is why when you look at later on the emergence of Islam in China, the Chinese were very tolerant of the existence of Muslims for most of the period, but Islam had to be defined on state terms. It had to be given a kind of, it had to be understood from a kind of state Confucian perspective. So if you look at like Chinese descriptions of Islam, it's quite interesting because there's a recognition of Islam, but at the same time, Islam has been redefined heavily from a Chinese perspective. Now, why I'm talking about open and closed systems is because this will lead us to the discussion later when we talk about Society 5.0. But also it makes us think about the changing nature of religion, the difficulty of applying the term religion in such different contexts. Now, just to finish off the discussion about the Axial Age, Karl Jaspers was not quite as familiar with Islam as perhaps we would have liked him to be. So he generally excluded the discussion of Islam from the conversation, and he roughly ended the Axial Age around the time before the emergence of Christianity. But another historian, Marshall Hodgson, in the 1960s, wrote a book called The Venture of Islam, where he actually saw Islam as the culmination of the Axial Age, so as the final Axial Age religion. Because in many ways, Islam sort of perfected and consolidated the evolution of these Axial Age tendencies by having a very egalitarian approach to religion. Of course, we didn't think about Muslim prayer, everyone standing side by side. There are no differences between, elites or religious scholars or anything, right? Prayer could be led by any person, really, as long as they could read the Quran. And also, its attitude to other religions is interesting because, in a way, And there's one system I haven't talked about, which is the Persian Empire system. The Persian Empire took Zoroastrianism as the official religion, but very early on recognized that it had to tolerate other religions because it was always going to be a minority. So the Persian approach to this was to say, okay, Zoroastrianism is the official religion, but we're going to allow other religions to exist, and we're even not going to try too hard to define those religions. So as opposed to the Romans or the Chinese, they needed to recognize the existence of them. They needed to say, well, okay, I need a representative from that community, and I need a representative from that community. But what you want to do behind closed doors, in your churches, in your synagogues, that's up to you. We're not going to go in and try to define it. We're not even going to try to understand it. It's kind of lakum dinukum waliya din sort of approach, if you guys understand that. So Islam in many ways, in a way, built on this model. And of course, this is Quranic because we can see this concept in the reference to the dhimma in the Quran, and perfected this model in which you have, on the one hand, the advantages of a state level religion, managing sort of at the political level, the different religions, but then allowing for freedom and allowing religious institutions to define themselves. Now, the only thing that didn't exist within any of these systems, except for India, of course, is allowing the individuals to simply just choose for themselves and pick and mix as they like. And this is because, of course, it's very difficult to do this. And in fact, it was unimaginable to do this because the idea of religion as separate from other spheres of life didn't really quite exist. So this leads us to the real crux of the discussion, which is when exactly does religious education have to be defined as religious education itself? In fact, where does religion have to be identified as religion as opposed to other spheres of life? And this goes to the Reformation, of course, the many, many decades of war between the Protestants and the Catholics, which led to, of course, death, destruction, persecutions, great migrations. And at the end of it, of course, Europe was incredibly tired. It had just had enough of this religious difference and conflict. So very, very quickly, Europe then emerged two types of peace treaties that built on the other, culminating the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which basically was an agreement by different states, Catholic and Protestant, to recognize that Catholics and Protestants should be tolerated, even though the nature of the state at the official level might be Catholic. You know, so if you're a Catholic citizen, you could live under a Protestant king, and you had the freedom to practice your religion, and vice versa. And this meant there was a separation in essence, between religion and other spheres of life, particularly politics, in a way that had never been conceivable before in any of these ancient societies, but particularly so in Christianity, where if you think about medieval Christianity, it was actually the other extreme of anything. You know, if you think about how even the Chinese tried to micromanage different religions, the Christian church perhaps took the most extreme by making sure that even on an individual level, you were not allowed to really break out of the conformity. So essentially, this is the issue why Jews never really had a comfortable position within Christian society, was because to be a member of society itself in a Christian context, you simply had to be a member of the church. So if you're not a member of the church, not really possible. And of course, there are sort of exceptions if we think about certain Christian states in Spain or Sicily. But on the whole, this is the reason why we don't find a sort of slow migration of Muslims from neighboring lands into Christian lands, because it was simply impossible to act as a Muslim, to be officially recognized as a Muslim within that context. So often I've often wondered what happened to Muslim traders who spent a lot of time in somewhere like England. And I think in many cases, they actually simply had to adopt actually a sort of taqiyya, or as Christians, or perhaps pretend to be Jews, sorry. And there hasn't been enough historical research on this, but it's an interesting area of investigation, which I think is worth considering. Anyway, that's a digression. The Treaty of Westphalia, of course, then brings us to the modern state, with the birth of the modern religion-secular divide. And alongside that, the idea of interreligious tolerance, which was not necessary in any previous society, because of course we had either the extremely open models of India or more closed models like China, but which still recognized that, you know, everybody was essentially by our definition, religious. So there was no need to make that distinction. The other issue is that, of course, then this leads with the separation of religion from state. This creates this divide that continues to this day and was identified in the 1950s as the theologico-political problem by the philosopher Leo Strauss. I'll get to Strauss at the end. One book worth reading is Kantorowicz's The King's Two Bodies, and this is interesting in the Malaysian context because it really shows how Christian kingdoms like England actually had a very similar concept to the idea of daulat in the Malay Sultanate context. So kings would often simply be believed to have possessed almost on their level, they were people, they were recognized as just regular people, but because divine right was invested in them, they were also believed to possess a kind of magical, spiritual power. And people often went to kings in order to receive blessings, to get cures, and so on. So with the Westphalian state model, this was impossible. So we essentially had a separation of the idea of spirituality from politics. And we have the separation of the idea of religion itself from secular. So if we go back to the term religion itself, another useful figure to talk about is Talal al-Asad, the anthropologist who gave us the kind of genealogy of the term religion in a close way. He talks about how secularism and religion are actually two terms that were born around the same time. So to understand religion, we kind of have to, what we mean by religion today, we kind of have to understand what is meant by secular. Which essentially, in conclusion, means that you cannot really talk about religious education today in the same way you would talk about religious education before the birth of the modern age. So this brings me to the comparison between UK and Malaysia, which are both interesting countries insofar as Malaysia and the UK have both preserved constitutional monarchies that to some extent have a religious character to them. Not in the same way that we do have in the past, but have tried, as the idea of kedaulatan perhaps has survived more than in anywhere I can think of, with the exceptions like perhaps Japan or maybe Bhutan, in fact, is no longer, I think, going to be a kingdom. In any case, so the idea of religion at the state level is still preserved in the context of Malaysia and UK. And of course, this had a lot to do with the colonial relationship between the UK, and the model was actually formed by British colonization. So there's that similarity there. So there are two religions at the official state level: Christianity in the UK, Islam in Malaysia. And these two have, to quite a large extent, still an important role in the field of education in general, but particularly in the field of religious education. So we think about church schools are still quite common in the UK context. That even my local school where I send my children to is officially a church school, even though they don't really get taught to be Christians there, but it's still kind of run by the church. But even non-church schools, you'll see, have quite strong relationships with the church. So the church still has quite a large role in education in general, in a way that I would say perhaps even more so than the religious authorities do within the educational context in Malaysia. Now that's something I'm not as familiar with, so I'll let you guys talk about this in the discussion. The other similarity, of course, is the multicultural or multiracial aspect of these societies, and the issue of religious differences alongside those cultural or ethnic differences as well. So the two countries have actually tried to, in a sense, resolve or maybe incorporate these differences in different ways. So in Malaysia, of course, which you're more familiar with, you have the division between, I hope this is still relevant. I'm basing this on my knowledge from maybe 20 years ago, so some of this might have changed. So please forgive me if this is a little bit outdated. But the division between Pendidikan Islam, which is still very much about the formation of Muslims as Muslims with Muslim values, so the continuation of Islamic teachings, religious education as Islamic education, and on the other hand, for the others, Pendidikan Moral, which is, I guess, philosophical ethics. And you could say that Pendidikan Moral is essentially a citizenship subject. It's about forming ethical, virtuous citizens, right? So it's about creating kind of that social integration in a way that does not conflict with the demand of the official religion to be recognized and to continue to produce its members of its society. Whereas in the UK, we do have Pendidikan Christian, you could say. In Christian schools, you'll still find Christian schools that still teach Christianity for Christians. So Catholic schools in particular do this. But it's become more blurred because of the nature of society itself. The more secularized nature of society means that students are, you can't take for granted, even within a Church of England school, most of the students of Christian background, whose parents or grandparents might have been Christian, are going to be Christian. So it's become blurred in many ways. Alongside that, of course, we can mention that there are other faiths, such as Islamic schools or Jewish schools, which do continue that, but that's on a minority level.
So may I interrupt you for a while? You have 10 minutes to go for your
10 minutes. Okay, that's absolutely fine.
So sorry.
Yeah. No problem. So religious education we talk about religious education in the UK. What we are talking about is the study of world religions, the study of many different religions, from a kind of neutral or academic perspective. So in a sense, it's aimed at bringing about knowledge about different religions, such as the range of the major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and we include Sikhism in the UK context because of the large population of Sikhs here. And it's not there to bring about the formation of religious individuals so much as to provide more information about different religions in order to avoid conflict and misunderstanding. So it's very much a citizenship model. It's much more about social integration and cohesion. So just to demonstrate what it looks like on the ground, this is a curriculum from a primary school. So it's not about teaching religion or forming religious values of any sort. It's mainly about describing what do Jews do, what do Christians do, what do they look like, what differences. Now this exists alongside certain school systems where they do preserve religious education as the imbibing of religious values. But on the whole, this is as much as would take place within most schools in the state system, or even in the private school system. And in fact, there's been a large debate in the last 10 years emerging out of apathy mainly to religious education. Now, many people don't really see the point of it. They think, in the minds of many people, of course, religion is an outdated concept. They feel like it's a waste of time. I've heard of schools where the religious education classes are simply handed to the PE teacher, right? Physical education, Pendidikan Jasmani teacher, and they do it on the course of a week, just to tick the boxes. On the other hand, of course, there are many advocates for religious education, which argue that if we don't have this kind of knowledge, we will have misunderstandings that will lead to further conflict in society. And in the minds of many people, in particular, these are misunderstandings related to the fairly large Muslim minority population we have. So many religious education trainees that come to study in Edge Hill are quite motivated by the desire to, in fact, bring about more knowledge and understanding of Islam or Muslims to their predominantly white school audiences, or other religions as well, such as Hinduism or Judaism. Some of it is driven by also curiosity and interest and discovery of religion, but a lot of it is this desire to create more understanding and social cohesion in order to avoid potential conflict in the future, especially as we see the rise of Islamophobia or hatred towards Muslims growing. The need for religious education became more and more. So in the last 10 years, what the government tried to do was actually, in the past, it was possible to simply teach one religion in school, in secondary level. So if you're a Christian school, you could simply teach Christianity. Now it's no longer possible. You have to teach at least one other religion alongside that religion. So in fact, interestingly, many schools have opted to study Islam because of those political needs, but also Judaism sometimes because it kind of fits with the history of Christianity. But some have opted to study Buddhism or Hinduism simply because they have the presence of a specialist in that subject in the area. So even though religious education is clearly seen as a need from the perspective of policymakers and often or educationalists, there's still hostility from the general public to the subject. And there are cases, that emerged in the last few years of parents taking their children out of religious education classes because they were afraid of their children becoming indoctrinated. And particularly this was associated with fear of being indoctrinated by the values of Islam. So it shows the seriousness of this topic within the UK context. The other way, so I mean, just to briefly point to these, there's a work here of one of my colleagues in Edge Hill, Francis Farrell, who looked at the way in which the government tried to, alongside this, inject the idea of citizenship into the teaching of religious education. So the idea of fundamental British values. And there's a big debate about what these values are, and to some extent, are they not simply values of all the religions anyway. But alongside that is the fear among some populations that religious education is being used as a tool to control and manage populations. So again, bringing to mind those more closed systems that we talked about in the past, such as the Chinese system, and to some extent the Roman system. The other issue, just briefly, is that alongside the fear and hostility to religious education, or apathy at the very least, we have interest in what's known as the mindfulness movement. So this is something emerging out of Buddhism, the practice of meditation techniques in order to still the mind, to overcome anxiety, to improve mental health. So interestingly, while people are afraid of religious education, if you just look at this, I just looked, these are just some news from the last few days, but it's always emerging, new programs, new activities related to mindfulness. And these are introduced in a separate context from religious education, simply as activities for the students. So while there is hostility to religious education, there's interest in well-being, or spiritual or mental well-being, at least based on historically spiritual or religious roots. So this leads me to some final questions, such as, if we look at the comparison between the two, could we draw on these comparisons in a useful way? So in the context of Malaysia, is it possible to say that with the existence of different cultures, ethnicities, religions, is there a need for an interreligious religious education on the model that we find in the UK? And how would this be brought about? In the UK, on the other hand, could we turn to the religious education as a kind of well-being model in the way that was beautifully described by Dr. Zawawi at the beginning, in a way that would make it a more acceptable subject? And what might be the obstacles in the way for this? Just quickly touching on the last bit here, Society 5.0, not a topic I've thought about deeply because I don't live in East Asia, and I think a lot of this is emerging out of the Japanese model of integrating technology into society alongside artificial intelligence. But I have thought a lot about artificial intelligence and the big jumps that it will bring about in society. I mean, to cut a long story short, if the pros of embracing this model is that if we improve AI and integration faster, we can solve basic problems like health and potentially even conflict, crime, security, all kinds of issues. And AI could even help us think through solutions, right? I mean, we've recently seen scientific breakthroughs brought about by improved AI. And once AI begins communicating with AI, this will accelerate. So from a religious education perspective, how do we incorporate this into it? Are we simply there to embrace this phenomenon? Are we there to sit on the sidelines and allow it to happen in a neutral sense? Or are we there to perhaps challenge it? And the key thing here is values, I suppose. AI does not create its own values. It is created by humans. And therefore, we always go back to the same question: what are our fundamental values? So the basic question religious education, or perhaps religion in general, must answer in this new age is it worth sacrificing? To what extent are things such as the environment, perhaps short-term well-being, and maybe even civil liberties are worth sacrificing in the name of acceleration? And of course, this is a question that China has revisited again and again. Chairman Mao made a lot of great sacrifices in order to bring China into the industrial age. And now we can see that China is making more sacrifices to bring itself into the new high-tech age. And taking, again, its attitude that religious differences are more of a problem and need to be redefined at a micromanaged level. We see this happening among the Uyghur in China. So this is an issue. They're not so much trying to get rid of the Uyghurs so much as to redefine them within the context of an emerging modern China. But to what extent, how much is sacrificed here? This is a question we need to ask. The question to ask is, how much will this affect religion itself? As we've seen, religion itself has become redefined through the different ages, through the Axial Age, which you could say is part of the second agricultural revolution, through the Reformation, Enlightenment, which were in a way precursors to the greater leap of the Industrial Age. How much will this redefine religion itself? I'll leave you with these questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harith, for your good sharing. I know a lot of things you want to share to us, but then we are limited of the time because we lost you for few for not few minutes, but nearly an hour, I think. Yeah, but then
it was an hour.
Inshallah, we will invite you again for the next session. Yeah, for the same topics. So for now, I like to open for the floors. If the participant got any question for Dr. Harith regarding the topics has been discussed, yeah, please.
I'll just stop presenting.
Okay, guys, ladies and gentlemen, if you got any questions, please do ask our guest speakers.
I'm happy to receive questions in Malay as well.
Yeah, please, Dr. Adil, yeah.
Hi, Assalamualaikum, Dr. Harith. Thank you for the enlightening talk. I think the angle with which you took was very refreshing for me because I've not had that kind of an angle on the discussion of religious education so far. I was wondering, because there were just too many things that you were sharing and they were really good, and I was wondering the books that you've referred to, what are they? And I've not actually read Carl Jasper's or any of the angle. So could you share with us some of the books that you refer to so that we can read further after this? Thank you.
I'm happy to create a reading list based on the books I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, thanks.
No problem. I'll send it to Dr. Zawawi. Sure. And I must say that, yeah, some of this, the different angle is partly because, I mean, most of you work in education studies, and I'm a historian of religion. So when Dr. Zawawi invited me to do this talk, I had to really think hard about how to use this in an effective way. I mean, there are connecting points, of course, because I study Islamic scholarship. So, you know, I mean, all fields are connected in a way. So, yeah. Thank you for your very positive comments, and yeah, apologies if any of it is confusing, and I'm happy to make clarifications. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Harith. We got yes, please, Dr. Azni. You raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Ustaz Faisal, and thank you, Dr. Harith, for coming back, and a very good and clear presentation. I would like to ask just now when you said that the China government sacrifice things in order to become what they are now. Are they like sacrifice their values, or are they sacrifice something from their religions or their political views? So can you just explain that to us? Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Azni. Yeah, that's a very good question. Obviously, I have to state that I'm not a China expert in any way. It's probably the least my sort of blind spots in the history of civilization, and it's something I would love to visit China one day and do more studies on the topic. But I think, and on an immediate level, it's useful to understand what's going on in China from a long history point of view, because not to say that it excuses them at all in any sense, but it makes more sense that the Chinese have always, to preserve the integrity of the state, which is defined by Han Chinese culture, by, a combination of religions, that's Confucianism, Taoism. Even think about the nature of Buddhism in China. It had to be redefined for China. I mean, every religion has to be redefined anyway in any context, but at an official level, this was done in a much more micromanaged way in China than anywhere else in history. And this contributed to its success. So in some ways, then we can say that this does reflect the values of China. They're not coming out of nowhere. There's even Chairman Mao's Great Leap kind of makes sense in the way that, in a sense, China has always been about maintaining the integrity of the society as a whole, and making certain sacrifices on the individual level of freedom in order to accomplish that. Now, again, I don't want to overgeneralize because there's of course a lot of complexity here and stuff that I don't even really know fully as a historian. But what I guess I meant by the current situation in the Uyghur context was that, you know, they have the issue of Muslim populations there that they have tolerated for many years, right? Even Chairman Mao did not make such a great effort to radically transform them. The problem is, as we're entering the new revolution in technology, China is concerned about security first and foremost, of course. It's concerned about its position in the world. And more than any other country, it thinks forward in the sense of, you know, it's able to make these kind of plans. Now, I don't want to sound like somebody who's promoting China, and I don't think China is as efficient about thinking about the future as some of its advocates think. But I think if you look at the big picture, the integration of society through technology. So Japan has this very benevolent model of 5.0, right? It's like we're going to be still a free society, but robots are going to be helping us and compassionate and caring. China is sort of perhaps a bit more realistic about the reality of technology, I think, because already, you know, we have a situation where most of the details of our everyday lives at the internal level, at the individual level, my inner thoughts, my conversations with friends are recorded and accessible. State surveillance is possible, even here in the UK, in a way that was not imaginable by any system, political system, or even religious system in the past. So any desire to create an efficient system like that will then worry about a group of people that might not fit in, that might raise questions, that might revolt. And of course, the position of the Uyghurs next to countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan raises issues for the Chinese. So I think in some ways they are working in you know, within their value systems, but I don't want to generalize, because within China, there's always been contradictory ideas about what Chinese values are. So Confucianism was always in debate with Taoism, which was also in a sense complicated by Buddhism. So we don't want to overgeneralize what Chinese culture is about, but there has been a consistent pattern of the state trying its best to order different religions, tolerate different religions, but order them at a very micro level. And this seems consistent with its long history.
Okay, thank you for the explanation and information.
Thank you for your question.
Yes, please. From Shamsuddin, yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you, Moderator and Dr. Harith Ramli. This is very insightful discussion. It is about religious education. So my question is, what kind of religious education, or what model of religious education do you think we should provide to our students in Malaysia? Do you think religious education like UK, or do you think the Malaysian religious education is enough, but we have to upgrade? Because if you see in the UK, I think in early 2000 there are many issues about religious education, and then in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, there is a Trojan horse issue and the latest prevent strategy. So do you think that kind of RE we can import to develop our religious education in Malaysia? So what is your opinion, Dr. Harith?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question, and it also makes me, you know, it reflects that you guys in Malaysia know quite a lot about what's going on here in the UK. So I'm very glad to hear this, because there are many benefits in comparing the two societies. I don't really want to prescribe for Malaysia, because I haven't really lived in Malaysia for 20 years. I mean, I go back once in a while, you know, balik kampung, but it's hard to be able to really know, you know, if you don't raise a family there and so on. So I don't know the local context well enough. But I guess I think it's worth considering whether or not maybe some level of RE in the UK sense can be introduced within the context. So one challenge is, should we do away with the division between Pendidikan Islam and Pendidikan Moral in the first place? Should there be something that is shared between the two? Or if you want to introduce religious education, should it be done within those contexts? So should sort of Pendidikan Islam sort of include some level of ilmu about other agamas, you know, other religions, and how can this be done in a way that is effective within that Islamic education context? And then Pendidikan Moral as well. Or should there be a separate third class? But then I don't know about, with this overburden the curriculum, whether this is necessary or not, I don't know. I can only share maybe my personal experiences from growing up in Malaysia. And I remember when I was in a tadika, right? And I remember the cikgu there telling me, my first knowledge of any experience of knowledge of Christianity. My mother was, of course, English, but she never taught us, she more or less was the one who taught me the Quran. So I never really had any Christian interaction until this point. I think I was about 5 years old, and the Guru Tadika was saying, like, if you've got to be careful with these Christians. If you minum the holy water, they'll give you the holy water. Then you cannot ucap kalimat syahadah. And that was such a formative thing. I mean, the teacher probably just said it, but that stayed with me. The first time I walked into a church in Malacca, I was terrified. So there are two things here. One is, at what age should you introduce knowledge of other religions? So there are pros and cons. I mean, if you introduce too early, then perhaps you are making the child confused. And what about raising them as, and then this applies to all the contexts, Hindus, Muslims. If you introduce too early, could it be confusing for them? They won't be able to distinguish between their own religious identity and others. Or actually would help. And this is a question that you can also look at other fields in education, perhaps like sex and relationship education as well. We have a big debate now in the UK about when to introduce knowledge of different alternative type of families, which I won't go into. This will obviously be more controversial in the Malaysian context, but it's the same kind of question. If you introduce too early, could it be harmful? But if you introduce too late, could it be then too late, right? And so, I mean, it's a question I'll throw back to you. I don't know, Shamsuddin, if you want to give your thoughts on this, or anyone else. But it's a difficult question. I think I can see the benefits of it definitely in Malaysia, because just to avoid that kind of basic misunderstanding and the races, we look at Malays, look at Indians, and they don't really understand what's going on. And actually, if you study Hinduism, you realize, okay, it's not just people sembahyang to berhala, it's got a very deep philosophy. Our own scholars like Al-Biruni realized that if you go to the Upanishads, the highest teachings of Hinduism, they are more or less corresponding to Islamic Tawheed. So not to say that they're the same, but to recognize that there's more to it than just the superficial encounters that we have. So that's the thoughts I can have. Maybe, this might help social integration in Malaysia. And if we link that to Society 5.0, I guess something I should have mentioned is, in Malaysia, if you want to follow this model, Japan is a homogeneous culture. It's very homogeneous. It's susah nak jadi foreigner in Japan. I don't know if any of you live there, but anyone who is not Japanese cannot fit into this model. You think about the history of Christianity in Japan, there's also been many problems with the introduction of other religions. So Japan can embrace such a model because it's already integrated as a society in the traditional sense. Malaysia is multicultural. Can it really embrace this Society 5.0 model without having to do what China is doing, or without maybe then jumping to the other extreme and adopting an India approach, India before Hindu nationalism, kind of treating religion as something that is a private choice and open religious systems, which has its advantages. I'm not saying this is so that's the question. We have to think about integration of society before we think about integration of technology and humanity as well, because the two can clash. Sorry, Shamsuddin, I don't know if you had any thoughts. Yeah.
No, I also don't have any answer for that question, because I just, for your information, I just started my journey into this very deep field of study. So I just finished my PhD, and my research is about inter-religious harmony in Malaysia. So this is the first step actually. So maybe we can discuss more about this later. As moderator said, you will present more after this in other session, inshallah.
I'd be very happy to hear about your research, and if you like, I'd be happy to read your PhD thesis as well, if possible.
Inshallah, I will send. I will contact you later, inshallah. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shamsuddin and Dr. Harith, for your response. Yeah, any other questions, response from the floors? There is one question in chat box, Dr. Harith. Yeah, Dr. Harith, how
Okay.
can we bring back the glory of Islamic civilization into our modern society?
The glory of what? Islamic civilization?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big question. I think it's a complicated. I guess it kind of depends what you mean by glory of Islamic civilization. Because I think in Malaysia, my personal opinion, and this is something that took me years to realize, you already have the glory of Islamic civilization. In the sense that the deepest sources of knowledge of Islam, right, that are needed for the person. And what is Islam for? Islam is about submission to Allah and reaching the akhirah, right? You have that. You go to any sekolah pondok in the remote areas, and you spend some time with some of the teachers there, and you feel it. You realize, hold on a second. I travel in the Middle East. I went to Syria. I went to Egypt. I went to Sudan. I met very scholars, sheikhs, and then I came back to Malaysia, and I realized actually I didn't have to go all the way there. I could have just done this in Malaysia. But sometimes, you only appreciate what you have when you go outside of it. So from my perspective, at least anyway, my humble perspective, the glory of Islamic civilization is still alive and burning. As long as there are people who are cultivating the deep spiritual knowledge, the love for the Prophet ﷺ, the path to the Akhirah, and they have the freedom to do so, and they are supported by society, and they are not persecuted or harassed, and they are not corrupted by the dunya, then it's there. We don't need to recreate it. If what you mean is the kind of philosophical and scientific advances, that's a more difficult question, because then it connects us to again, philosophy and sciences are religious, deep-rooted. So if we're thinking about, falsafa and Malik and Ilmul Ilahiyat, they are there. You go to the pondok, they are teaching this stuff. There's a scholar, I have a book which I'm still trying to read, which is about Ilmul Ishraq in the Islamic, in the Malaysian context. So if anything, Muslim world as a whole is discovering that the resources are there in the Nusantara in a way that has been lost in the Middle East. So don't need to go very far. You just need to seek within the society for those fruits. But we're thinking about maybe being able to rival the other civilizations, the dominant civilizations like currently emerging China and US. Then it's a difficult question if that can ever be accomplished, or whether that will ever be accomplished again in the same way, because the nature of scientific technological advances are different. If you're thinking about political unity and independence, Allahu Alam. I mean, history has cycles, and I think we are about to come to a new cycle, and it's possible that something will emerge in the Muslim context that will revive these societies and make them less dependent on the outside world, particularly on the West, and free them from neo-colonial structures. But I think whatever emerges is going to be different. So it won't be about reviving so much as preserving what is there and using it to channel into something new. But honestly, Allahu Alam, the person who asks might know better the answer than the person who is answering.
You're very humble, Dr. Harith.
No, I'm honest.
Like there is one from Dr. Edel. Yeah, you got questions, Dr. Edel?
Yeah, I have one more. Thank you. So, can I gather your thoughts now? So, are we saying in terms of well-being of a society? So we're talking about integration in society. Are you saying that we need to look at both spirituality as well as religiosity? Is that why you're quoting a lot of great books? I can see that you're looking at the Hinduism, the communism, is that how you're looking at things, so that we can have integration, therefore a well-being, holistic well-being in the society?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Thank you, Adelina. Yeah, this is where we have to unpack what we mean by the term religion. I think this is getting in the way of us benefiting from our encounters with other religion. When we look at India, for example, I mean, I know less about China, but I'm sure it applies. A lot of what we might think, oh, this is religious, actually does not necessarily have to be identified as religious in the same way as something that, within our context. So one example is yoga. or techniques of meditation. I know this is a controversial topic in Malaysia because there was a fatwa against yoga, and I definitely recognize there are problems here. If you start a yoga class with mantras to Hindu gods and you're a Muslim, then you might want to ask, is this haram, or But this is the question. I can't really fully answer this, but in the UK they have managed to take the Buddhist idea of mindfulness as a technique for well-being, a spiritual well-being, if you like. And again, spirituality is a word that is often needs to be redefined, but to think beyond just physical and intellectual in a basic way, to think deeper about the nature of human reality. How far can we do this meaningfully in a way that we can actually look across techniques of practice or in other traditions and say, actually, this can be used within, say, a Muslim context? Because this was happening. If you look at Ghazali, the impact of, or Ibn Sina, they took on Greek ideas of the soul. Bukan saja they took the mathematics and the logic, they looked at their spiritual medicine. And what Ghazali's great contribution is really to sort of draw the lines. He said, okay, this is where the metaphysics is limited, or this is where the Greeks were too, determined by their own pagan ideas, and we cannot take this, but we can actually take the rest. So likewise, Biruni did the same. He looked at the Indians and he said the Upanishads are profound. And there are people today, again, I'm not a perennialist, right? Just to make it clear, I'm not someone who believes in all the religions are the same, but I do recognize that there's something to be said about studying something like Hindu philosophy or metaphysics, that suddenly when you think back about Islam, it actually helps us understand certain things. And I believe actually as a historian that this happened anyway. Early Kalam definitely interacted with Hinduism and Buddhism in a way that is not often recognized. If you look at the life history of many great Muslim figures, like Fakhruddin Razi, they actually went to India and studied, and we don't really know the details, but they spent some time in India. What happened and what emerged is quite interesting. So we need to think a bit more about what we mean by religious. And, so I do think that there's no point, if we are sitting alongside these other traditions and we want to create dialogue, and we want to also benefit from the dialogue in a way that makes sense for us on a general well-being level, there's no reason to draw the lines. We need people who know where to draw the lines, basically. We need Ghazalis. And so that then we can identify what can be meaningfully taken from, say, techniques like meditation or breath techniques, which has, so in reality, this was always done. If you look at the history of Islamic civilization. Another example is yoga, really, I mentioned earlier, which is the breath techniques of yoga were translated by Al-Biruni. And then later on, if you look at it, the breath techniques then get reintroduced into the Islamic spiritual context of Sufism. Sufi sheikhs took the techniques and they replaced the Hindu gods with Anbiya, right? They said, okay, we don't need the devotional element here is just superficial. The techniques themselves about drawing us to self-knowledge, to understanding is more important. So they managed to translate these in a way that was meaningful. So this is perhaps what's lost in our current Islamic state of civilization. The confidence to do this and the abilities to do this. And perhaps also the fact that the term religion itself has become concreted in a way that makes us, it's hard for us to look at other so-called religions and actually identify, actually what they're doing here is not really necessarily religious. It's civilizational or cultural. It's something that we can actually learn from or borrow. I don't know if that's a useful answer, but I think that's where I was coming from. But again, I want to make it clear that, yeah, safeguards are important for this as well.
Yeah, thank you. Those books, yeah, we need those books, the list.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder.
Rex, yeah, we have Dr. Ramzi. Yeah, please, Dr. Ramzi. Any other questions?
Yeah, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dr. Harith, thank you very much for your presentation. Yeah, actually, my question is this. Actually, as your presentation, what I understood that there is a common platform among the religions, especially the ethical aspect, where we can build a common communication between the religions. So since inculcating this, the values is the objective of religions, and then particularly challenging the social issues. So this is the, main objective of the ethical part of the religions. And then this ethical part can be the platform for the communicating with among the religions. But still in the society, we see the social issues are increasing in not only European countries, but also in other countries as well. So then I have a question then what's whether religious education fail, or or something we never as a educators did not give the proper way or use methodology to inculcate these objectives. So this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed. That's a very profound question, actually. It's quite hard to maybe generalize on such a global scale. But I guess on a global level, if I think about everything, I thought the long history of different religious traditions, what seems to be common here is that the two dimensions of religion I mentioned, the kind of social, political, the identity forming social dimension of religion, or ethical, if you like, and then the personal, the deep inward dimension of religion, right? They're both necessary, of course. You cannot really have one without the other. But it seems like into the modern age, the social side actually survived. Because when you think about it, this is actually what the two bodies is about. At the end of the day, the modern secular state actually cannot exist without the foundations of the society that were laid by religious societies prior to it. So this is actually why, it's very rare to find any society that underwent secularization on such a grand scale in a forced way, right? Most states preserve religion, and religions continue to, in fact, support the transformation of these religions going into industrialization, modernity. So this aspect is fine. Identity formation is fine. Think about Malaysia. Muslim identity, if anything, became more clearer in the last 20, 30 years than it ever was. I mean, I remember a time when everybody in the village, kampung, for example, didn't wear tudung. Now everyone in the family is whether willingly or otherwise are wearing a tudung. I'm not saying that wearing tudung is bad or otherwise, but definitely there was less social pressure, and now there is more social pressure. So the success of religion on the social level has been fine in the modern state. So definitely didn't fail on that sense. If anything, it became more successful because of the tools of modern communication. And one thing that we were naive to think about is the impact of this technological change on that. And so Islam, with modern communications, becomes more homogenized, right? Islam that you see in Istanbul or Kuala Lumpur or Jakarta or anywhere, really, the UK even, you see the same pattern, and at the level, this is happening also because of consumer market forces. People are buying the same products. We're all right now talking, I'm talking the UK, so we're even sharing in educational, in the university context, we're sharing the same language, the culture. So religions have managed to succeed on this sense. And if anything, maybe succeed a little bit too well, to the point that there is almost less potential for the other dimension to proliferate. So because of that, religion becomes more of an identity issue in the modern state. The freedom to move on the spiritual level becomes harder, and also even the possibility of thinking at that level becomes harder. So I think where we have truly failed, and this is again, I think, global, is to be able to preserve that ability. So going back to the analogy of the people in the kampung, I think that people were not wearing tudung, but in some ways, if you think about just my basic memories of the village life, in some ways their values were more Islamic. They were more naturally Islamic than we might be today. Not to say that we need to go back to that or anything like that. I'm just saying that, we need to think about what went missing there, and that has a lot to do with the success of identity formation at the state level, at the society level, and how much that we can then preserve or even revive the channels into the inner spirituality. So if I can formulate this in a more simple way, self-knowledge, right? Ma'rifatun nafs. This is something that somehow became harder in this age. And if we go back to the earlier scholars like Ghazali, this is so crucial. This is foundational to the religious system as a whole, religious education. So without that, then you just have the outer layer, and you have the success of the religion at the superficial level, but actually the decline of religion in the inner level. So I would say I can think of, the Islamic world, I can think of the Christian world, happened even earlier, arguably. Think about even Judaism in a country like Israel, incredible decline. I've witnessed the ultra-Orthodox people living there, incredible decline on the spiritual level, even though successful on the political and social level. Likewise, Hinduism in India, India is becoming more officially a Hindu nation, but actually then does that mean it's actually lost its connection to the deeper channels of spirituality? So yeah, I don't really have a good answer to that question, but those are my thoughts on it. I don't know what you think, Mohamed.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Actually, you have given me another perspective, because of course, in our identity formation, the religion has contributed a lot. I mean, compared to the past. However, in the spiritual or the values level, we have lost. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
All right. I give one chance for the participants on the floors. If you got one more questions. No. Rex, so I think there is no more questions. So Dr. Harith, would you like to sum up your presentation about our discussion today, please?
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for staying on much longer than you probably planned to because of the accident. But of course, we don't believe there are any accidents. Everything has a reason. So it allowed me actually to rehearse the topic one time before to myself. So, alhamdulillah ala kulli hal. To summarize, I think, thank you very much for the organizers for allowing me to, for provoking me to think in such general terms. I don't normally get a chance to do this. So it's actually been a great pleasure and very beneficial on my end to draw on not only my own institutional context, but also my personal interest and research interest, and also comparing Malaysia and UK, and also thinking on a global level. So actually this has been as beneficial, if not more beneficial for me than for you all. And thank you very much. Every single question that you've raised has been incredible, and it makes me glad to see that the intellectual culture in Malaysia is alive and well. I think to summarize, the key points here are, if we're thinking about religious education and well-being, it's first important to think about the meaning of these terms in an effective way. And to do this, we need to go and look at the long history, the deep roots of these terms, and also the deep roots of these societies, and where we have come about a situation today where religion is confined to all these certain spheres of life, and for good or for bad, but also to then compare across different societies in the world, historically and today, and the different ways in which religion and religious education has been looked at or approached. And I guess the key thing here is to think about the contrast maybe between very closed societies traditionally, such as China, for good or for bad, again, this is not a value judgment, and for very open societies like India. And again, there are pros and cons there, and many societies who have tried to sort of maybe adopt a more mixed model. And then adding on the dimension of modernization, secularization, and the concept of the modern secular state. And we looked at Malaysia and the UK as two different examples, where perhaps UK, there's more emphasis on the secularization at the level of society. Malaysia, less so, but with similar problems that perhaps we can be used to to look at ways in which to resolve the different problems that religious education is trying to tackle in these different contexts. And finally, building up to the future, because there's no point studying history if it's not to think about the present and the future, how much this can help us in the most likely incredible revolution that is about to take place around us. If the world does not suddenly just collapse and enter into a new dark age, we're going to enter into a massive acceleration with societies competing to incorporate artificial intelligence in a way that will raise entirely new questions about the human subject, about the nature of citizenship, individual freedoms, and of course there is the environment to consider, and how this is going to affect the survival and nature of religions, and how religions in situations where religions will still be taken seriously, such as Malaysia, can be used to avoid some of the problems here. So effectively, I think Malaysia is a great place to look at, because people still, you won't have the problem of people dismissing religious education and learning. At the same time, there is the pluralism, there's freedom to think about different religions and compare them. And I don't believe Malaysia will ever embrace the China model, really. It's impossible, given its history as an open society and culture. So I think, you know, looking at China, but also looking at India, perhaps, and what it does might be interesting. And maybe, perhaps, I think the UK is degenerating into a backward civilization. But that's a discussion for another time. But maybe looking at the UK as well as a model for state-level democracy. I'm afraid I don't really have any answers, but looking forward, I think it gives me optimism to think that you have raised such a question and are discussing, and just getting a taste of the different research activities going on in Universiti Malaya and elsewhere. It gives me a lot of optimism that you are thinking in the right directions in order to prepare us for this big change, whichever direction it takes, inshallah. Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal.
Inshallah, alhamdulillah. Thank you, Dr. Harith, for your great sharing knowledge and some ideas. Yeah, some ideas maybe you see in Malaysia is very crucial. Yeah, some ideas. So it's good for the discussion. Yeah. So inshallah, I know you got a lot of ideas to share more with us, but then because we run of the time, so we have to cut the time. Inshallah, we will invite you again for another time for another session. Inshallah. So yeah. So I like one phrase from you today. Yeah. You said that we have to emphasize integration of society, not to emphasize integration of technology. Yeah, isn't it? Okay, Dr. Harith, so thank you again for all participants for being waiting. So I'm personally and on behalf of Faculty Educations apologize again because something happened in the early of the webinars. Then there is some requirement from the participants. Please allow us to take a picture with you. So everybody, please, participants, on your camera. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Any other one? Any others?
Dr. Rahimi. Okay.
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you,
Again,
organizer.
thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you,
With that,
Dr. Harith.
thank you for attending. Then I hope that you have learned and enjoyed this webinar. All right. So for those who are not yet subscribed our channel, UM Education channel, please do so. All right. Thank you very much. And
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Assalamualaikum.
Hey.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Dr. Harith. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
you.
Ya, Dr. Harith. Terima kasih.
Sama-sama, Zawawi. Terima kasih kerana jemputan.